Hello? Hello? Oh, you got to do better than that. Hello? Hello? Excellent. Now, a couple of things before we start. First, this play, the last of this production today, is in memory of two people here in Fairfax who left us this last year, who passed away. Jay Seymour, who used to run the Fairfax Players before we took over as the Fairfax Theatre Company, and our very dear friend Clark Higgins, a good friend of the Fairfax Theatre Company, with his time, his creativity, his filming, his editing, his production of DVDs of our shows. He also left us this past year. So this production has been in that memory. Now, a couple of ground rules here. First, thank you for being here. Last week we sweltered under that blazing hot sun. This week we'll be lucky if we're not blown away. But you know what? I prefer this. So here are the ground rules. That this being an open-air theater, and in the tradition of Shakespeare at the time of the Globe Theatre in England, where the punters, that is you, the audience, would come in off the street for free mostly, and then throw insults and other objects at the players. Well, please don't do that, or we'll throw them back at you. But more than that, they were part of the production. And so, the first ground rule is that today you are part of the show. So at various times, again in the tradition of Shakespeare, if there was one or two people representing soldiers, you had to imagine there were hundreds, if not thousands. If there were one or two people, actors, representing the mob, again, there were thousands. So that's where you take over. You are going to be asked to be part of the mob, part of the soldiers, wherever and whenever they appear. So I have to hear you first as the mob roar. How about a little better than that? Okay. Great. Now, as the soldiers in battle. Soldiers in battle. Go for it. Brilliant. Brilliant. So, before I introduce our small company, and I've got to tell you, this is our 15th production. My name is Sam Parry. I am the artistic director, creator of the Fairfax Theatre Company, and for my sins, I'm up here. I prefer to be there, but here I am. We have a small company, perhaps one of the best I've worked with. And 6 weeks ago, I wasn't sure if we were going to put on a play or not. What with COVID and other restrictions and the difficulty of finding actors, I guess because of COVID, or because they thought we were such high caliber company they couldn't join us. I don't know. But we ended up with a terrific small group of people that you're going to meet in a moment. All right, Shakespeare. Who was Shakespeare? Nobody knows for sure. There are a bunch of people who think it's that guy from Stratford-upon-Avon. Some people think it was Ben Jonson. Others think it was Christopher Marlowe. My favorite, with a bunch of others, is that it was the Oxford, the Duke of Oxford, the Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere. He's my contender. So we had a vote today. I would be voting for him, not for the other guy. And the reason for this is quite straightforward, quite simple. In Shakespeare's time, and I'm going to read you something, plays were required to be registered prior to publication. It was important that plays were regulated, as playwrights used the stage as a forum to express their own views on religion and politics. Any playwright found guilty of expressing seditious or heretical views or opinions which were in opposition to the crown or government could be tortured and sentenced to death for treason or even atheism. That was a dangerous occupation, especially if you happen to be a member of court. You couldn't speak your mind out, so you found some stooge and you put your words in his mouth. Hence we had Stratford upon Avon's bard, William Shakespeare. So, you may disagree with me, but I'm right. Now, in the tradition of Shakespeare's plays, women were never allowed on stage. All female roles were played by men or young boys. Today we are going to do some gender bending, and some of the most well-known, well-spoken monologues and soliloquies will be done, enacted very well by the female members of our cast. Are you ready to meet them?
Yes!
Well, let's do it then. Introduce themselves. Cast members, the stage is yours.
My name is Anthony Catudio. I hope you enjoy our show.
My name is Anastasia Encarnation. Welcome.
Welcome, my name is Danielle Katz. I hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. My name is Laurel Harris. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. Cece Parry Hansen, please enjoy and be inspired. What do we know about the body of work that is attributed to the Bard? Well, what we do know is that it is considered to be one of the greatest collections of writing in the coda of literature, perhaps in any language. And so, with that in mind, let us proceed with something familiar. A notable scene from a so-called Scottish play, Macbeth, in which is illustrated the psychological nature of the play's themes, motifs, and symbols. It shows us how Lady Macbeth really feels about all of the horrible things her ambition has caused her to do. Provoking her husband to commit the murder of the king. Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 1.
Yet here's a spot! Out! Damned spot, out, I say! 1, 2. Why then, 'tis time to do it. Hell is murky. Fie, my lord, fie! A soldier and afeard? What need we fear? Who knows it when none can call our power to account? Yet who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him? The Thane of Fife had a wife. Where is she now? What will these hands ne'er be clean? No more of that, my lord, no more of that. You mar all with this starting. Here's the smell of the blood. Still! All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Wash your hands. Put on your nightgown. Look not so pale. I tell you yet again, Banquo's buried. He cannot come out on his grave. To bed, to bed. There's knocking at the gate. Come, come, come. Give me your hand. What's done cannot be undone. To bed, to bed, to bed.
Wow. Dastardly stuff. The character Macbeth was loosely based on Mac Bethard Mac Finlach, a real king of Scotland in the 11th century. Now, as narrators, it is the job of Laurel and yours truly to be the chorus, to explain what's happening, to give you a background, give you a flavor. And of course, narrators always carry their trusty book with them. So we read from here. Back to Macbeth. There are some key differences between Shakespeare's story and historical reality. Where the bard portrays Macbeth's reign as short and bloody, the real king was generally perceived to be a quite successful and fair ruler, reigning for 17 years from 1040 until 1057. He did kill Duncan, but in battle, and then went on to rule successfully.
Now, let's move on to our next enactment, shall we? It's safe to say that there are few people on this earth who do not know of the tragic story of two star-crossed lovers in Romeo and Juliet. Perhaps this is one of the most adapted tales, maybe hundreds, if not thousands of times over the years, and not always exactly in the bard's own words. Well, there have been musical versions, opera renditions, and more than 100 film and television versions of the play. So, including one of my favorites, West Side Story. One of the best known big screen adaptations of the play itself. I agree. But what is it about this rivalry between the Montagues and the Capulets? What is it about this 16th century play that still captures us with a lasting impression on its readers and audiences? In our next scene, we eavesdrop on one of Juliet's nurses as she laments her horrible charge in Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 3.
Faith, I can tell her age in 2 hours. I'll lay 14 in my teeth, and yet to me teeth be it spoken I have but 4. She is not 14. How long is it now to Lammastide? Even or odd, on Lammas Eve at night shall she be 14. Susan and she, God rest all Christian souls, were of an age. Well, Susan is with God. She was too good for me. But as I said, come Lammas Eve at night shall she be 14. That shall she, Mary. I remember 12. 'Tis since the earthquake now 11 years, and she was weaned. I never shall forget it. Of all the days in the year, upon that day, for I had then laid wormwood to my dug, sitting in the sun under the dove-house wall. My lord and you were then at Mantua. Nay, I do bear a brain. But as I said, when it did taste the wormwood on the nipple of my dug and felt it bitter, pretty fool, to see it tetchy and fall out with the dug. Shake, quoth the dove-house, 'twas no need I trow to bid me trudge. And since that time it is 11 years. For then she could stand high alone. Nay, by the rood, she could have run and waddled all about. For even the day before she broke her brow. And then my husband, oh, God be with his soul, oh, was a merry man, took up the child. Yea, quoth he, dost thou fall upon thy face? Thou wilt fall backward when thou hast more wit. Wilt thou not, Jewel? And by my holy den, the pretty wretch left crying and said, I! To see now how it just shall come about, I warrant and I should live 1,000 years, I shouldn't forget it. Wilt thou not, Jewel? Quoth he. And pretty fool, it stinted and said, I!
You know, we break the fourth wall and we like the sound that comes from there. It gives us the juice to give more. So, when you put your hands together or you yell, please do it loud. Now, Shakespeare wasn't the first person to write about family rivalry that makes Romeo and Juliet's love an impossible predicament. Long before him, there was Dante. Dante's Divine Comedy, an epic that took more than 10 years to complete. And he wrote,
Come and see, you who are negligent! Montagues and Capulets, Minaldi and Philippeschi, one lot already grieving and the other in fear. Come, you who are cruel, come and see the distress of your noble families and cleanse their rottenness.
See, way back when there were dysfunctional families. Well, the fact is that stealing ideas from other writers, was a normal thing to do. There was no litigation, no lawyers, no, accusations of plagiarism that we have today. So it's hardly surprising that the story of Romeo and Juliet isn't exactly an original one. In fact, I believe almost every TV channel has soap operas that are modeled on that. The Bard based his star-crossed lovers on the main character in Arthur Brooks' 1562 poem, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet.
Interestingly, though, one of the 27 moons of the planet Uranus is named Juliet. In fact, 24 of the 27 are named after characters in Shakespeare's plays. Among these are
Puck,
Bianca,
Mab,
Cupid,
Stefano,
Oberon,
Titania,
Cressida,
Ophelia,
Margaret.
Applause for Margaret, please. Margaret's up there.
Sorry, Margaret. Many of these names are famous Shakespeare names and characters, but it's worth noting and drawing attention to Cupid from Timon of Athens and Margaret, the gentlewoman from Much Ado About Nothing.
And of course, the reference to poets brings us to the many iconic sonnets written by the bard, such as this.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. Every fair from fair sometime declines by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal beauty shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. The translation of this, perhaps most famous sonnet, is something like this. Shall I compare you to a summer's day? You are more lovely and more moderate. Harsh winds disturb the delicate buds of May, and summer doesn't last long enough. Sometimes the sun is too hot, and its golden face is often dimmed by clouds. All beautiful things eventually become less beautiful, either by experiences of life or by the passing of time. But your eternal beauty shall not fade, nor lose any of its quality, and you will never die, as you will live on in my enduring poetry. As long as there are people still alive to read poems, this sonnet will live, and you will live in it.
Well, Shakespeare's sonnets are expressions of ideas and thoughts and are layered with multiple meaning. They always have two things in common. All sonnets have 14 lines. All sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. They have a certain rhythm. Here, spoken by Danielle, is another famous verse.
As an unperfect actor on the stage who with his fear is put beside his part, or some fierce thing replete with too much rage whose strength's abundance weakens his own heart. So I, for fear of trust, forget to say the perfect ceremony of love's rite, and in mine own love's strength seem to decay, overcharged with burthen of mine own love's might. Oh, let my books be then the eloquence and dumb presagers of my speaking breast, to plead for love and look for recompense. More than that tongue that more hath more expressed, oh, learn to read what silent love hath writ. To hear with eyes belongs to love's fine wit.
This is the translation in modern English. Like an unrehearsed actor on the stage who forgets his lines because of nervousness, or some angry animal overwhelmed with rage so that in spite of its strength, it is weakened by its loss of control. I, not trusting myself, am unable to articulate the love I feel. And the strength of my love seems to be less than it is. Overloaded with the weight of my beloved's dominating power. Oh, let my writings then be the speakers and the signals of my speaking heart that begs for love and hopes for reciprocity. More eloquent than that tongue that more usually expresses the heart. Oh, learn to read the volumes that my silent love has written. To hear with eyes is something characteristic of lovers.
Now, Shakespeare's plays are generally categorized as either comedy, tragedy, or historical. As I mentioned before, women were not permitted to take part on stage, all the roles being played by men or boys. And as I mentioned, we are going to change that today. We're going to indulge in that gender bending, and we will do so a few times today. Thus, in our next monologue, we are back at the time of Julius Caesar. Brutus and his cohorts have assassinated Caesar. And now Brutus is before the mob, explaining why he did it. And he has their sympathy. He convinces them it was necessary. But then as he leaves, on comes Mark Antony, the manipulator, the orator, and the close friend of Julius Caesar, to tell the mob, that's you, what he feels about what happened. So, enter mob!
Lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones.
Aye.
So let it be with Caesar.
Aye.
The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious.
Aye.
If it were so, it was a grievous fault. And grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man.
Aye.
So are they all honorable men.
Aye.
Come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious?
Nay.
When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. That Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him the kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition?
Nay.
Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once. not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar. And I must pause till it come back to me. Antony!
Mark
Powerful stuff. Now, Brutus' treachery was the most difficult for Mark Antony to stomach. But in fairness, Brutus did what he did, believing it was the right thing to do, the right action to get rid of a dictator. He loved his friend, but he feared for Rome. Here in Act 2, Scene 1 of Julius Caesar, this is the morning after the night before, where Brutus has been planning with his co-conspirators. And he's been throughout the night plotting how best to do this, how to assassinate the man. And they've gone, and he sits there alone in the early hours of the morn. And we have a glimpse of his ordeal as perceived by his wife, Portia. Here sits Brutus.
You have ungently, Brutus, stole from my bed. And yesternight at supper, you suddenly arose and walked about, musing and sighing with your arms across. And when I asked you what the matter was, you stared upon me with ungentle looks. I urged you further. Then you scratched your head and too impatiently stamped with your foot. Yet I insisted. Yet you answered not, but with an angry wafture of your hand gave sign for me to leave you. So I did, fearing to strengthen that impatience which seemed too much enkindled, and withal, hoping it was but an effect of humor which sometime hath his hour with every man. It will not let you eat, nor talk, nor sleep. And could it work so much upon your sheep as it hath much prevailed on your condition, I should not know you, Brutus. Dear my lord, make me acquainted with your cause of grief.
Assassinations, death, and suicide feature in many of Shakespeare's plays. In fact, 3 suicides occur in both Antony and Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. 2 suicides in Romeo and Juliet, and another presumed suicide offstage in the last act, that of Lady Macbeth. One wonders about Shakespeare's attitude toward death when, on his 52nd birthday, when he died, or so they say, it is said that he had penned a curse on his grave, daring anyone to move his bones. From that final resting place, his epitaph was,
Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust and close it here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves me bones.
But on to happier moments, shall we? One such is in the Midsummer Night's Dream, where we encounter the Master of Revels in the palace of Theseus and Hippolyta, where it is he that is convincing Theseus not to watch the players, the mechanicals.
Call Philostrate. Where is Philostrate?
Here, mighty Theseus. There is a brief. How many sports are ripe? Make choice which your highness will see first. A play there is, my lord. Some 10 words long, which is as brief as I have known a play. But by 10 words, my lord, it is too long, which makes it tedious for an all to play. Not one word apt, one player fitted, and tragical, my noble lord, it is. For Pyramus therein doth kill himself, which, when I saw rehearsed, made mine eyes water. But the more merry tears, the passion loud laughter never shed.
What are they that do this play?
Hard-handed men who work in Fairfax here, which never labored in their minds till now, and now toils like an unbreathed memory with this same play against your nuptial.
Will I watch it?
No, my noble lord, it is not for you. I have seen it over. It is nothing in this world, unless you can take sport in their intents, extremely stretched and corned with cruel pain to do you service.
Well said. Now, A Midsummer Night's Dream is said to be the most performed of all of Shakespeare's plays. The play itself was inspired by some unlikely narratives from the recent. It has inspired Die Hard the movie, Henry Purcell's celebrated opera of the 1690s, The Fairy Queen, Felix Mendelssohn's famous wedding march in 1840, da 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 da. But equally popular, and another that has been dramatized in film as much as on stage, is Henry V. And who is not familiar with the famous call to arms and the raising of the spirit in that soliloquy at the Battle of Agincourt? Soldiers, rise up!
Dear friends, once more! Or close the wall up with our English dead. In peace, there is nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen the sinews, conjure up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage. Then lend the eye a terrible aspect. Let it pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon. Let the brow o'erwhelm it as fearfully as doth a gulled rock o'erhang and jutty his confounded base, swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean. Now, set the teeth, stretch the nostril wide, hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to his full height. Oh, you noblest English, whose blood is fed from fathers of war proof, fathers that, like so many Alexanders, have in these parts from morn till even fought, and sheathe their sword for lack of argument. Dishonor not your mothers. Now attest that those whom you called father did beget you. Be copy now to men of grosser blood, and teach them how to war. And you, good yeomen, whose limbs were made in England, show us here the mettle of your pasture. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not, for there is none of you so mean and base that hath not noble luster in your eye. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. The game's afoot! Follow your spirit, and upon this charge cry, God for Harry! Harry! England! And St. John! St.
Now, the fact is that most theater around the world is like this. We're slightly better, but mostly like this. Small-scale community, rep, summer stock, not the Broadways, the West Ends where you pay an arm and a leg to get a seat up there. So, now that we are at the intermission, please do not leave. We have cameras set up all over here. We know you. We will follow you to your homes and haunt you. But please enjoy the intermission. We'll be back shortly. There's a concession stand there for you. Might be interested to hear from our 3 actors.
Shakespeare's plays were never actually published during his lifetime. Yeah. They are known today only because 2 of his fellow actors, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, recorded and published 36 of them posthumously under the name The First Folio, which is the source of all of William Shakespeare's books published.
Copyright didn't exist in William Shakespeare's time, as a result of which, and as noted earlier, there was a thriving trade in copied plays. To help counter this, actors got their lines only once the play was in progress, often in the form of cue acting, where someone backstage whispered them to the person shortly before he was supposed to deliver them.
As a matter of fact, today, 2 of Shakespeare's plays, Much Ado About Nothing and Hamlet, have been translated into Klingon. The Klingon Language Institute plans to translate even more. Well,
I can't compete with that. Speaking of Hamlet, did you know that of the 3 children that William Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway had, 2 daughters were named Susanna and Judith, and their son was called Hamnet? Unfortunately, he died at the age of 11 in 1596. But one wonders if the name had anything to do with Hamlet, the play. Our next monologue is taken from that play. Here we find Hamlet as director. He is asking the players to perform the lines in a precise way so as to have the most impact. Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 2.
Speak this speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. But do not saw the air too much with your hands thus, but use all gently. For in the very torrent, tempest, and if I may say, whirlwind of passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious, periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings who, for the most part, are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I would have such a fellow whipped for overdoing termagant. It out-Herods Herod. Pray you, avoid it. Be not too tame, neither. Let your own discretion be your tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action. With this special observance, that you overstep not the modesty of nature, for anything so overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end, both at the first and now, was and is to hold as 'twere a mirror up to nature, to show virtue, her own feature, scorn, her own image, and the very age and body of the time, his form and pressure. Now this overdone or come tardy off, though it make the unskilful laugh, cannot but make the judicious grieve. The censure of the which one must in your allowance overweigh a whole theatre of others.
The bane of directors. Should I do it like this? Yeah. But you told her to do it. You're right. But you said I was right. You're both right. Earlier in the play, same play, Hamlet, we find the young Ophelia distraught. She has been ordered to stop singing Hamlet, but here she is with him and she grieves the loss of his mind and her own misfortune. She doesn't know he's acting, his madness. She actually believes he's going off for rocker. Here in Act 3, Scene 1, she references his erratic behavior and his decline. Enter Ophelia.
Oh, what a noble mind is here our throne. The courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mold of form, the observed of all observers, quite down. And I, of ladies most deject and wretched, that sucked the honey of his music vows, now see that noble and most sovereign reason like sweet bells jangled out of tune and harsh. That unmatched form and figure of blown youth blasted with ecstasy. Oh, woe is me. To have seen what I have seen, see what I see.
as we will see and hear in other plays, in other soliloquies, the men portrayed in Shakespeare's plays are pretty duff. A lot of them. And they get worse. Here is another brief monologue, one that is often quoted even by those who are not into Shakespeare, but they've heard it somewhere and they quote it. Hamlet, Act 5, Scene 1. Enter gravediggers.
What is this?
Ah, the king's court jester, sir, Yorick.
Let me see. Alas. Oh, Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. Fellow of infinite jest. Most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. Now, how abhorred in my imagination it is. My gorge rims at it. Here hung those lips I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set a table on a roar. Not one now to mock your own grinning. Quite chapfallen. Now, get you to my lady's chamber and tell her, let her paint an inch thick. For this favor she must come. Make her laugh at that.
Indeed, that was brief. But ironically, the play was the longest in Shakespeare's portfolio. Some say the title was based on his son, Hamnet, a very common name at the time. But others have suggested that Shakespeare simply borrowed the previous play, The Spanish Tragedy, written by Thomas Kyd in the late 1580s. Yet others believe that this in turn was based on an even older legend, the original story in a 13th century chronicle written by one Saxo Grammaticus, in which Amleth is a little boy, with the common knowledge that his uncle killed his father. Because Danish tradition expected sons to avenge their father's death, the uncle keeps an eye on the boy. Perhaps the most quoted of all of the plays, in the monologues rather, is Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 1.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, but by a sleep, say, to end the heartaches, and the 1,000 natural shocks that the flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream, Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time? The oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love that the laws delay, the insolence of office, and the patient merits of thy unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would Fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life? But that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country whose no-born traveler returns, puzzles the will. It makes us rather fear those ills we have than fly to others we know not of. Thus, the conscience does make cowards of us all. Thus, the pale hue of resolution is sicklight awe with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment. And in this regard, their currents turn awry, with no name of action. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph of thy horizons, be all my sins remembered.
Antonio. As I mentioned, this is our 15th play, and he's been with us from the beginning, all 15. Now, within the plays of Shakespeare, there are many songs which have become famous as poems in their own right. Here's one such from Othello. As I mentioned, there are some pretty bad guys in Shakespeare. And Othello is one of them. In Act 4, Scene 3, in which Desdemona awaits her lord with some foreboding as she recalls.
My mother had a maid named Barbary. She was in love, but he she loved proved mad and did forsake her. And did forsake her. She had a song of willow. An old thing 'twas, but it expressed her fortune. And she died singing it. That song tonight will not go from my mind. I have much to do but to go hang my head all at one side and sing it, like poor Barbary. The poor soul sat sighing by a sycamore tree, seeing all the green willow, a hand on her bosom, a head upon her knee. Sing willow, willow, willow. The fresh streams ran by her and murmured her moans. Sing willow, willow, willow. Her salt tears fell from her and softened the storms. Sing willow, willow, willow. Lay by these. Willow, willow. Sing willow, green willow, must be my garland. Let nobody blame him
is't that knocks? I called my love false love, and what said he then? Sing willow, willow, willow. If I court more women, you'll couch with more men. Good night. My nice stewage.
Good stuff. Poignant and evocative, and much the same plaintive yearning to be found in Cleopatra's soliloquy. Act 5, Scene 2 of Antony and Cleopatra.
I dreamt there was an Emperor Antony. Oh, such another sleep, that I might see but such another man. His face was as the heavens, and therein stuck a sun and moon, which kept their course, and lighted the little earth, His legs bestrid the ocean. His reared arm crested the world. His voice was propertied as all the tuned spheres, and that to friends. But when he meant to quail and shake the orb, he was as rattling thunder. For his bounty, there was no winter in it, and autumn 'twas, that grew the more by reaping. His delights were dolphin-like. They showed his back above the element they lived in. In his livery walked crowns and crownettes. Realms and islands were as plates dropped from his pocket. Think you there was, or might be, such a man as this I dreamt of?
Think you there was or might be such a man as this I dreamt of? One can but try, right? Now, false accusations was not an uncommon ingredient in Shakespeare's plays. In A Winter's Tale, we have the unfortunate Hermione plead her innocence at court after her husband Leontes accused her of adultery with his best friend Polixenes. Told you, the bad guys throughout the Shakespeare's plays. Another bad guy, Leontes. A Winter's Tale, Act 3, Scene 2.
Sir, spare your threats. The bug which you would fright me with, I seek. To me can life be no commodity. The crown and comfort of my life, your favor, I do give lost. For I do feel it gone, but know not how it went. My second joy, and first fruits of my body, from his presence I am barred, like one infectious. My third comfort, starred most unluckily, is from my breast, the innocent milk in its most innocent mouth, haled out to murder. Myself on every post proclaimed a strumpet.
No.
With immodest hatred the childbed privilege denied, which longs to women of all fashion. And lastly, hurried
here to this place in the open air before I have got strength of limit. Now, my liege.
No!
Tell me, though, what blessings I have here alive, that I should fear to die. Therefore, proceed. But yet, hear this. Mistake me not. No life. I prize it not a straw. But for mine honor, which I would free. If I shall be condemned upon surmises, all proof sleeping, else but what your jealousies awake, I tell you 'tis rigor and not law.
Ah!
Your honors all, I do refer me to the oracle. Apollo be my judge.
What a guy, huh? Now, let us turn to one of the most notable characters in the works of Shakespeare, that of Shylock. Here was a man in turmoil. He was misunderstood, socially and racially abused, disdained, anti-Semitic prejudice ran deep in England, although few people in Shakespeare's England would ever have met a practicing Jew. The kingdom's Jewish population had been expelled in 1290, more than 200 years before Shakespeare's birth, and practicing Jews would not be permitted to enter the country until after his death in 1660. Yet in The Merchant of Venice, a play that has proved ambivalent for many audiences throughout the centuries, Shakespeare's depiction of the Jewish moneylender Shylock has struck many as anti-Semitic. In Act 3, Scene 1, we get a glimpse into why Shylock might have been the person he was, and among other things having to deal with the fact that his daughter Jessica eloped with Lorenzo, a Christian, a penniless Christian. And of course, here we find Shylock addressing the jibes from Salanio and Salarino, especially when questioned about that infamous pound of flesh bargain. A pound of flesh? What is that good for?
What's that good for? To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000. He scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies, and what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands? Organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Are we not fed the same food? Hurt by the same weapons? Subject to the same diseases? And healed by the same means? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that.
Yes, if a Jew is wronged by a Christian.
If a Jew is wronged by a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge! If a Christian wrong a Jew, what is his sufferance by Christian example? Why? Revenge!
You learn from the villainy from us.
The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard. But I will better the instruction.
Today the name Shylock has become part of modern usage and a common adjective that has implicit racial overtones. Today, while we wait for the global pandemic to run its course, its unrelenting course, and given the prevailing ethos of race-related ideologies of hate, as well as social ones, we might further consider the question of how Shakespeare's work engaged with race, racism, and people of color. There are various references. There's Iago's racist language in Othello, the seemingly out-of-place racial slurs that Lysander throws at Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Each time a scholar of color encounters such language, it stings. It has to be quickly shaken off so that the analysis can take place in spite of this confrontation. It's hard, people, it's hard. But
It is a little odd, but not perplexing, that for years white scholars have refused to, or did not see, the racial meanings behind the languages of light and dark, or white and black. In Renaissance texts related to beauty, behavior, and courtesy, whiteness is figured as an ideal. Its mirror, its interior, as well as exterior terms. In the imagination of Shakespeare's contemporaries, whiteness was linked to a group of qualities associated with virtue and everything that is good.
this influenced the way in which the English began to consider difference, how one appeared in their demeanor, behavior, and physical complexion would have been viewed as a reflection of the inner self.
This appears to have been a moment in history when whiteness was being emphatically placed above blackness for all sorts of reasons. In skin color being one tangible way of understanding difference.
Now, many sonnets that Shakespeare would have read, and certainly some of the poetry he wrote, tended to use imagery associated with whiteness to describe female beauty. Now, in this next sonnet, if you look at your programs, you will see an asterisk against it. Because this sonnet, which has been attributed to Shakespeare, was actually written by my hero for being the bard, was written by Edward de Vere, who was a poet in his own right. We can debate this later on. So here, to read this famous verse, is Danielle.
The lily in the field that glories in his white for pureness now must yield and render up his right. Heaven, pictured in her face, doth promise joy and grace. Fair Cynthia's silver light, the light of the moon that is, compares not with her white.
This anonymous poem, dated 1593, compares a beautiful English woman to a lily and the moon, suggesting both would be fairly jealous of the lady who is much whiter and shinier than they are. The shine was an important feature since it reflected God's light, showing the lady to have a perfect soul. You get the picture. Racial injustices were rife in Elizabethan times, as indeed was social injustice. And not least among this was the way in which women were treated in society, from the very top of society down.
As I mentioned earlier, there's some great characters, male characters in Shakespeare. Not. Here's another one. Take, for example, Part 1, Act 2, Scene 3 of Henry IV. 1, 2, 3, 4. It is a telling portrait of gender and domestic life in the Renaissance, or, if you prefer, Renaissance. Hotspur's obsession with strategy and war makes him a bad husband. What a surprise. He appears to think of his wife only as a sideline to his life as a fighter. Lady Percy reveals the emotional deficiency of the valiant Hotspur and provides a glimpse of the marital relations of the Elizabethan era. Enter Lady Percy. Here sits Hotspur.
Oh, my good lord, why are you thus alone? For what offence have I this fortnight been a banished woman from my Harry's bed? Tell me, sweet lord, what is it that keeps from thee thy stomach, pleasure, and thy golden sleep? Why dost thou bend thine eyes upon the earth and start so oft when thou sitt'st alone? Why hast thou lost the fresh blood in thy cheeks? Given my treasures and my rights of thee to thick-eyed musings and cursed melancholy? In thy faint slumbers I by thee have watched and heard thee murmur tales of iron wars. Cry terms of manage to thy bounding steed, cry courage to the field. And thou hast talked of sallies and retirees, of trenches, tents, of basilisks, of parapets, of soldiers slain, prisoners ransomed, and of soldiers slain in all the currents of a heady fight. Thy spirit within thee hath been so at war, and hath so bestirred thee in thy sleep, that beads of sweat have stood upon thy brow like bubbles in a late disturbed stream. And in thy face strange motions have appeared, such as we see when men restrain their breath on some great sudden hest. Oh, what portents are these? Some heavy business hath my lord in hand. I must know it, else he loves me not.
Wonderful. And as usual, overacting. As we have seen, there was no shyness in alluding to sex, or a lack thereof. Renaissance women were considered to have a right to pleasures from their husband, and Lady Percy has her needs in mind when she complains to Hotspur, "Given my treasures and my rights of thee to thick-eyed musings and cursed melancholy." Ah, love and marriage. How does it go? Together like... Can't have one without the other, indeed. In his sonnet 116, perhaps one of Shakespeare's most famous sonnet, the love sonnets, he reflects thus.
Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with brief hours and weeks, but bears it out to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved.
What of Shakespeare's own love life? Well, generations of biographers have portrayed it as being a rather colorful one. His purported lovers included Henry Wriothesley, the 3rd Earl of Southampton. Then there was a brothel keeper called Lucy Morgan, and Amelia Lanier, said to be one of the candidates for Shakespeare's Dark Lady, that shadowy figure who inspired some of his most passionate sonnets. Lanier was a poet in her own right, and some scholars believe that Shakespeare had Lanier in mind when he wrote the character Amelia in Othello. Indeed, Amelia has some of the most feminist lines in all of Shakespeare. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell, have their palates, both for sweet and sour, as husbands have.
Amelia Lanier's father was also a Venetian, so it might not be coincidence that Othello is partially set in Venice. The city is one of the most visited today, and not least because thousands of tourists from all corners of the world go there, influenced by the works of Shakespeare. They visit the Rialto Bridge in Venice. They throng the streets leading to Juliet's house in Verona, where messages are left for the ill-struck lovers as though they were real people and the building was their real home. Shakespeare's plays have been translated into innumerable languages, as well as Klingon, and interpreted variously in stories of crime, passion, science fiction, and who knows what other variations the future will bring. Only time will tell.
So with that in mind, good people, thank you for sitting through this in this freezing temperature compared to last week. We come to the end of our little journey back in time to the age of the bard. We'll take our leave of you in the hope you have enjoyed our diversions and unraveling of the little tidbits of Shakespeare and his writings. We thank you for your patronage and your time. Before we have a little end, I would like to bring on our players one at a time. Antonio. Anastasia. Danielle. Laurel. And Cece. if I may, in the true tradition of narrators who were supposed to further the tale, but often threw in their own opinions and when asked to overact it way beyond the page. I would like to end by a quote by the bard. Time is like a fashionable host that slightly shakes his parting guest by the hand and with his arm outstretched as he would fly, grasps in the comma
For parting is such sweet sorrow.
Thank you. Now, special thanks to you. Please applaud yourselves. You make a great mob and great soldiers. Special thanks to Osh and Carnation on sound. Pasha and Leslie concessions. And of course, our production manager, costume designer, and Jack and Jill of all trades, Shoshana Parry. Thank you. Please stay a while and party with us. Thank you.
You can warm up. We need dance music.